5 in the morning, July 5th, 1943. The Russian steppe thing, bathed in the pale light of dawn, holds its breath. In the trenches, in the turrets of tanks, in the cockpits of aircraft, millions of men wait. They know this is no ordinary day. They know that history itself is watching them. Suddenly, the western horizon is torn asunder in a line of fire and thunder. Thousands of German cannons vomit steel, and the air fills with the shriek of Stuka dive bombers, the Jericho trumpets of the Wehrmacht. Operation Citadel has begun. For a young German gunner named Klaus Reich, inside the belly of a brand new Panther tank, this is the moment of glory. The vehicle is a marvel of engineering. Its sloped armor and long 75mm cannon are the answer to the Soviet T-34. All around him, the armored wedge, the Panzerkeil, advances. The gigantic Tiger tanks lead the charge, immune, invincible. Confidence is absolute. This will be the victory that avenges the disaster of Stalingrad. But a few hundred meters in, reality bites back with teeth of steel. The ground explodes beneath his Panther's tracks. A mine. The tank lurches violently, a track shattered. They are immobilized, a perfect target in the middle of nowhere. And then, from positions that seemed empty, all hell breaks loose. Dozens of Soviet anti-tank guns, hidden in a web of trenches and emplacements, open up in a crossfire. It is a pack front, a wall of cannons designed to create a kill zone. The air fills with tracers. Armor-piercing shells slam into the hulls of nearby tanks with a deafening, metallic clang. A Panzer IV erupts in a ball of fire. A Tiger, the pride of the division, takes a hit to its side and grinds to a halt, a column of black smoke billowing from its hatch. Klaus and his crew, trapped in their crippled beast, can only watch in horror. The resistance they are meeting is not a defensive line. It is a trap of a depth and lethality they had never imagined. The greatest offensive in history had just slammed into the most formidable fortress in the world. To understand the magnitude of this gamble, we must return to the spring of 1943. The defeat at Stalingrad had left a bleeding wound in the pride and strategic capability of the Wehrmacht. Hitler, humiliated, desperately needed a decisive victory on the Eastern Front to regain the initiative, to prove to the world that the Reich was still the dominant force. The maps of the German High Command showed a tempting anomaly, a huge salient in the front line around the city of Kursk, where Soviet forces pushed deep into German-held territory. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, Germany's most brilliant strategist, saw in this salient a golden opportunity. His plan was bold and classic in its conception, a massive pincer attack. Günther von Kluge's Army Group Center would strike from the north, and his own Army Group South would strike from the south. They would meet east of Kursk, encircling over 1 million Soviet soldiers in a cauldron that would dwarf Stalingrad. The German command's faith was not based on tactics alone. It was based on technology. For this operation, Hitler had amassed the new wonder weapons of the German arsenal. The Tiger I heavy tank, with its 88mm gun, could destroy any Soviet tank at ranges where it was itself invulnerable. And the Panther medium tank, designed specifically to outperform the T-34, combined firepower, armor, and mobility in a way that, on paper, made it the king of the battlefield. But this faith in technology contained a fatal flaw. Hitler, obsessed with accumulating enough of these new tanks, delayed the start of Operation Citadel. Originally planned for the spring, it was postponed again and again into the high summer. Manstein protested, knowing that every day of delay was a day the Soviets used to strengthen their defenses. He had no idea how right he was. The time Hitler was gifting his enemy was being used by a man who understood war on an industrial, brutal scale, Georgy Zhukov. In the Kremlin, intelligence reports were arriving with astonishing accuracy. The Lucy spy ring, operating out of neutral Switzerland, was providing Stavka, the Soviet High Command, with incredible details of the German plans. They knew the units involved, the axes of advance, the composition of the panzer divisions, and even the expected date of the attack. This golden information presented Stalin and his generals with a crucial dilemma. Several commanders, of a more aggressive temperament, argued for a preemptive strike. They wanted to hit the Germans as they were massing, to disrupt their offensive before it could begin. It seemed the logical choice, the traditional Soviet doctrine. But Zhukov, whose reputation after Stalingrad was almost divine, opposed it with icy calm. His argument was a masterpiece of strategic patience and brutal realism. Before a skeptical Stalin, Zhukov laid out his logic. The Red Army, he argued, was not yet a match for the Wehrmacht in a battle of offensive maneuver. German officers were still tactically superior. To launch a premature attack would be to play their game. Instead, he proposed a radical idea, the antithesis of the blitzkrieg. He proposed a deliberate defense. His plan was to let the Germans smash themselves against a defensive trap on a scale never seen before, to let their precious, scarce tigers and panthers bleed out against a sea of mines, guns, and trenches. In his own words, "It will be better for us to wear the enemy out on our defense, to knock out his tanks, and then, bringing in fresh reserves, to go over to a general counteroffensive and finish off his main grouping." Zhukov didn't just want to stop the Germans. He wanted to break the back of their armored forces forever. Stalin, convinced by his marshal's iron logic, gave the order that would seal the battle's fate: dig. And so, for months, the Kursk salient was transformed. Hundreds of thousands of civilians and soldiers worked day and night. They dug over 5,000 kilometers of trenches, a labyrinthine network connecting bunkers, machine gun nests, and observation posts. They built 8 main defensive lines, one behind the other, extending over 150 kilometers in depth, and they sowed the earth. Over 400,000 mines, at a density of nearly 5,000 per kilometer a front, turned the wheat fields into gardens of death. The trap was set. The Germans were about to attack the greatest fortress ever built by man, and they were walking straight into the jaws of the beast. Hours before dawn on July 5th, based on precise intelligence that pinpointed the exact moment of the assault, the Soviets struck the first blow. A massive, preemptive artillery bombardment rained down on the German concentration areas. The surprise attack disorganized formations, cut communications, and inflicted casualties before a single German tank had crossed the start line. It was a harbinger of what was to come. When the German offensive finally got underway, it met a wall of fanatical resistance. In the northern sector, Field Marshal von Kluge's 9th Army slammed into the defenses of Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front. Progress was measured in meters, not kilometers. The heavy Ferdinand tank destroyers, enormous machines with nearly impenetrable frontal armor, proved vulnerable to mines and infantry attacks on their flanks. Kluge, already pessimistic about the operation, saw his worst fears realized. His offensive drowned in a sea of blood and mud, gaining barely 10 kilometers in a week of brutal fighting. In the south, the situation was different. Manstein's Army Group South, with its elite Waffen-SS divisions equipped with large numbers of Panthers and Tigers, achieved a deeper penetration. Fighting with undeniable tactical skill, the German armored wedges clawed their way through the first defensive lines of Nikolai Vatutin's Voronezh front, but every kilometer was paid for at a terrible price. The Soviets had perfected the art of anti-tank defense. The pack fronts channeled the panzers into deadly ambushes. Su-152 assault guns, nicknamed Zveroboy, the Beast Killer, lay in wait in hidden positions. Their massive 152mm shell could tear the turret clean off a Tiger or shatter a Panther with a single hit. The German tank crews, who had believed themselves invincible, began to feel fear. By July 11th, Manstein was at the gates of the small town of Prokhorovka. He believed he was on the verge of victory. If he could take it and break the final Soviet defensive line, the road to Kursk would be open. He concentrated his elite force, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, for a final, decisive assault. But Zhukov had anticipated this move. From the strategic rear, he had released his most powerful reserve, the 5th Guards Tank Army, under the command of General Pavel Rotmistrov. On July 12th of 1943, on the rolling fields around Prokhorovka, history witnessed its greatest tank battle. Hundreds of German tanks, including Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs, advanced to meet the tide of over 800 Soviet armored vehicles, mostly T-34s, head-on. The sky was thick with dust and smoke. The noise was a continuous roar of cannons, explosions, and the shriek of tortured metal. The T-34 crews knew they couldn't compete with the Tigers at long range. Their only chance was speed and audacity. Rotmistrov gave the order: advance at full speed, close the distance, fight at point-blank range. The Soviet tankers surged forward in an almost suicidal charge, seeking the weaker flanks and rear of the German panzers. The combat became a brutal, confused melee. Tanks rammed each other, firing at muzzle-to-muzzle distances. Some T-34s, their guns knocked out, deliberately rammed German tanks to disable them both. One veteran described the scene as the devil's workshop. The air stank of burning fuel, cordite, and charred human flesh. By the end of the day, the Prokhorovka battlefield was a graveyard of smoking steel. Both sides suffered terrible losses. The Germans lost dozens of their irreplaceable heavy tanks. The Soviets lost hundreds of T-34s. But tactically, it was a Soviet victory. Manstein's advance had been stopped dead. The momentum of Operation Citadel was broken forever in that hell of metal. Meanwhile, behind German lines, over 100,000 Soviet partisans had launched Operation Railway War, sabotaging German supply lines at the most critical moment. The day after the Battle of Prokhorovka, on July 13th, Hitler summoned Manstein and Klug to his headquarters in East Prussia, the Wolf's Lair. The mood was grim. The Führer had news that would change the course of the operation. 3 days earlier, on July 10th, Allied forces had landed in Sicily, opening a new front in southern Europe. Hitler, nervous and seeking an excuse to halt an offensive that had clearly failed, declared that Operation Citadel must be cancelled. He needed to transfer elite divisions, including the 2 SS Panzer Corps, to Italy. Manstein protested vehemently. He was convinced, or at least tried to convince himself, that he was one step away from victory in the south. He argued that one last push could break the Soviet defenses. But it was useless. The German offensive was spent. It had suffered losses in men and materiel it could not afford. The prized panzer divisions, the spearhead of the Wehrmacht, had been decimated. Hitler's decision was final. The greatest German offensive of the war ended not with a victory, but with a whimper. The psychological impact on the German army was devastating. Their faith in their wonder weapons and their tactical invincibility had been shattered against the wall of the Soviet defense in depth. They had fallen into Zhukov's trap, and the beast had been mortally wounded. The end of Operation Citadel was not the end of the battle, only the end of the German initiative. As the exhausted German troops began to fall back, the Red Army unleashed the true power of its strategic reserves. North of Kursk, they launched Operation Kutuzov, a massive offensive that liberated the city of Orel and pushed the Germans back. To the south, they unleashed Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev, which not only retook all the lost ground, but drove on to liberate Kharkov. The same divisions that had weathered the German attack now led an unstoppable counteroffensive. The Wehrmacht, which had begun the battle hoping to dictate the course of the war, was now forced into a desperate retreat that would, in essence, not stop until the ruins of Berlin. The casualty figures for the Battle of Kursk are debated, but they illustrate the scale of the slaughterhouse. The Germans lost nearly 500,000 men and some 1,500 of their best tanks and assault guns. Soviet losses were far higher, exceeding 800,000 casualties and over 6,000 tanks lost. But herein lies the key to the final outcome. The Soviet Union, with its vast population and its relocated industrial production beyond the Urals, could absorb these terrifying losses. Nazi Germany could not. Kursk was the swan song of the Blitzkrieg. The elite of the German armored forces was destroyed, never to regain its former strength. Germany's ability to launch large-scale strategic offensives on the Eastern Front was extinguished forever in those blood-stained wheat fields. The Soviet victory, built on Zhukov's strategic patience, precise intelligence, the heroic sacrifice of its soldiers, and an astonishing industrial capacity, passed the initiative of the war decisively and permanently into the hands of the Red Army. Hitler's great gamble had failed. The Soviet trap had devoured the Reich. From Kursk onwards, the road to the west was open. It would be a long and brutal road, but its final destination was now written.